Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast. Today, we're going to feature Betsy Bernard, who was the first woman president of AT&T. She was in that great class of superwomen who broke the barrier. And for 3 consecutive years, she was on the list of the 50 most powerful women in business by Fortune magazine. Blew us away.
After you hear her stories, you're going to know why she was on that 50 most powerful women in Fortune magazine, because she has seen it all.
And she broke some barriers that didn't have anything to do with what she learned in school and what she was doing on the job. She really was authentic and a trailblazer, and you are going to love Betsy Bernard.
Hi, I'm Betsy Bernard. I have spent my corporate career in the telecommunications industry. In the last 20 years, I have spent in boardrooms in different industries, all companies headquartered in the United States.
Too modest. She was the first woman president of AT&T, and it gets better from there. So we have a very heavy hitter with us today and a trailblazer in ways that none of you have heard yet. This is a great story. So Betsy, thank you so much for being with us today on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
So, I always like to start with your story, the brief version, and then your defining moments of your life and how you came to be who you are. So let's go there.
Okay, well, the short version, and at my age, it's hard to do short, but the short version is that when I was a junior in college, I got a call from AT&T and wanting me to come talk to them about their summer internship program, which I ended up spending that summer in Albany, New York. And then I was offered a full-time job when I graduated from AT&T, and 26 years later, I was elected to the president of AT&T. So that's the short version. A little bit longer version is during those 26 years, I had 17 different jobs at 5 different companies requiring 17 physical relocations. And I also got 2 graduate degrees along the way, one at nighttime at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and the other when I was fortunate to be selected by AT&T to go to the Stanford Business School Sloan Fellowship Program for a year, where I got a second master's. So it was a busy 26 years.
I think a lot of people worry about geography and how it impacts their lives and relationships. And you've shared a little about what was your defining moment, and that really brings that all together. So if you can, what was your life's defining moment?
Well, again, I think we have lots of defining moments if we're fortunate enough to live long enough. And some of those defining moments for me was the decision to take the job out of AT&T. I didn't realize that was a defining moment, but I had opportunities from GE and Xerox, and I just picked AT&T. Would I've had the same experience and success if it was GE? I don't know. In hindsight, clearly a defining moment. Being elected AT&T's president, clearly an incredible defining moment. But the one that I find most interesting when I reflect on it, and it was one that was clear to me, it was a defining moment when it happened, was that when I left AT&T in 2004, I was raring to go, and I was just going to take some time to look at different opportunities and to take a sabbatical life experience. And it was, my wife calls it my dating period, because I was just honored to have all these incredible opportunities to look at. I was looking at a CEO position in Amsterdam. I was looking at taking over a company that a private equity firm runs. And then if we were about 7 months into this, and if that couldn't get any better, Paul Allen offered me the CEO of Charter Communications. He and his board, I'd met with everybody, and that was it. So I was so excited. We were looking at houses in St. Louis, and all of a sudden I started having nightmares. All of a sudden I started having, nightmares about churn rates and bundle rates and all the metrics in that industry that you worry about. It's kind of like that. I'm running to class. I haven't studied for any of the exams. And oh, by the way, I don't have any clothes on. So I started having those but it was all around the industry metrics. I also felt that Charter was going to have to go through a bankruptcy as I looked at their financials. Turned out they did, and that was and all this experience of balance, I guess it would be what one would call balance, that I had over those last 7 months, not getting up at 4 a.m. every morning and not, just having some fun and having something other than work. I ended up turning it down, and it wasn't my greatest moment because I was on the altar with the ring being put on. There were a bunch of folks that were hoping, that were planning on coming with me if I made that move. So it was a difficult decision, but it was definitely a defining moment. And when I look back on that, that was end of 2004, 2005. I look back and I've had this incredible board career since then. 8 public company boards, 5 private company boards. I've taken companies private, I've taken them public. We've done transformational acquisitions. I've gotten to be in all kinds of industries, not just telecommunications. And so it definitely was a defining moment. It changed the trajectory of where I thought I wanted to be and what I thought I wanted to do. And I certainly learned a little bit more about myself as a result of that.
Well, so I'm really curious, kind of 2 parts to the story you just shared, particularly around the job offer. Number 1, you had all of these options that you were entertaining. What are some of the things that factors that you use to help make the right decision for you? To know which one am I going to say yes to whenever there's a lot of different options?
The one that, if as focused on career, the one that I think you're going to get the most amount of learning out of, and the greatest opportunity to grow and expand and have new experiences and continue to stay outside of your comfort zone. And so that's the screen that now, obviously you got contracts and the health of the company and a lot of other factors to look at. But on those factors, I would always think, as long as I know what I'm getting into, then I'm fine with it. It's getting in there and finding out, that's way different than what I had understood. But as long as I've been able to do a good job of due diligence, then, whatever I think is going to challenge me the most and give me the greatest opportunities. All those jobs I took along the way were to get a new experience, to get something that I knew, again, because of good people, helping create career paths that would make me a better executive, a better leader.
That's great. And I think that's going to be really helpful for our listeners. I'm going to kind of follow that up with the second piece of it is you had to tell them no. Whenever you get that far down, you're like you said, the ring is going on the finger.
It was
How did you do that?
It wasn't a great moment for me. I just said, I looked at it a lot and I don't think it's going to be a right fit for me at this time. And I look at, I still get, jittery when I think about it. It was that big of a deal in terms of the defining moment. And, just be truthful and transparent. And that's what I did.
And were you able to maintain positive relationships from that? Because I think that's a fear. That's a fear of.
Had so much with the staff folks and believe me, he had a lot of other things on his plate than maintaining a relationship with me. But the staff that I had dealt with during the negotiation process were gracious.
I've done that before, and I got some really bad reactions when I did it, and I had to wonder if they would have been so rough on a guy turning him down.
Yeah, and it's a question of when you turn them down. I've turned down a lot of jobs, but I didn't take the entire board through an interview process and spend time in St. Louis, looking at houses. I think it's the timing and how one does it, and the clarity and the transparency with which you provide the feedback. And there's always going to be, some people are just different in terms of how they react to not getting their way.
Well, so on this thing, because this is a question I hear often, right? So I'm starting the interview process. Do I let them know I have other things going on? My answer is always no. At what point, and you think about it when you've been a hiring manager as well, not just when you've been the candidate, but like at what point does it feel right to say, I'm looking at some other opportunities. As you can imagine, the market's hot. Any advice that you might give on how and when to help level set someone who might be dealing with that right now?
Well, I think that the way you're saying is, I think you need to be transparent. I mean, I don't, you don't want to appear, and you don't want to, in my opinion, be trying to leverage one job for another. Mm-hmm. I think that's a path that, for me, is a path I don't want to go down, and I think differently of folks if I've seen them go down that path. But, so if you're taking your one offer from company A and you're bringing it over to company B, and then you're taking B's and you're bringing it back to A's, I wouldn't want to hire you. And, but so it's about being, honest and transparent, and about your own career path. Actually, I was just, talking to someone yesterday whose goal is to be a chief medical officer. And so it's about, well, and you can either stay within the company that you're in now to accomplish that, or leave. And what I'm saying is that it's very fair and it's very important to share with your leadership what your aspirations are and what your goals are, because they're going to want to keep you, and they're going to want to figure that out. And their goal should be to help develop your leadership and your management. So be straight with them. On the other hand, once you get that figured out, if that can't get accomplished where you are, then shame on the people that you're working for, that they couldn't figure out how to give you that opportunity. And yeah, you got to go where you're going to get the opportunity and the growth and the learning and that experience.
Yeah, I'm going to want to find out a little how you tracked up, but I don't want to get too far away from this qualifier that came earlier on that will be very interesting to the people listening. When you mentioned consulting, what you were going to do with your wife. And this was years ago, and you were the out senior woman. You were one of the most powerful women in business in the world, and you were an out lesbian. That's a big deal. So can we hear that story? What it meant to history too.
I'm sorry, what was that last part of the question?
And what that meant to history. I mean, you being a role model.
That's part of it. But I met my now wife, Lori, when we were in Denver. I was at US West. We just sold US West to Quest. I was getting ready to go be a ski bum up at Lake Tahoe, but AT&T convinced me to come back for this great job opportunity. And so we moved to New Jersey, and we were out in Denver, and I'm certainly not going to go back into the class just because I'm a president, or at the time I was running the consumer division, et cetera. So we came together, and it was definitely trailblazing, and I actually think it was more trailblazing and harder for Lori in some ways, because we were a traditional executive couple. We'd be hosting clients at Pebble Beach. We'd be at AT&T board dinners together. When I was on the United Technology board, she'd be, with me at those board dinners, just like spouses do. And there were times, there are, times where you go to introduce, and again, in those days, couldn't be wife, so your partner, and you'd have to help some people appreciate what that is in a respectful way. And that was one, and again, we're talking 2002, 2003. So, I just always assume that people are well-intended, if not necessarily experienced or educated. I told earlier the story about we were hosting a table of clients, and there was always politicians that would be invited, and there was a senator from Texas, and I introduced Lori, and I said, "This is my partner, Lori, and well, what kind of business are you gals in?" And so I had to explain, exactly what that was, but I knew he wasn't being, ill-intended, and then of course his wife, becomes particularly attached to Lori, the clinical social worker. And so, yeah, it was, I think we were role modeling, and 99% of it was absolutely wonderful. there were some moments that when I look back on it, and I handle it differently. I'd be smarter too. An example I would share is, again, 2002, 2003, I think it was, Forbes wanted to do an article on, out executives, out execs in the C-suite. And, and I've got a full schedule. And so PR is handled by PR, and, they're always putting stuff in front of me that I would be doing. And so they came to me, and this is, so I said, sure. They go, but no, we don't think it's the right thing to do. We've got some stakeholders that we don't think. Now, you would, in this day and age, I know young people out here listening to this are going to go, really? Yes, really. and as a result, Forbes never ran the article because they couldn't get enough of us. And, I think I'd been their anchor. Now, in hindsight, 20 years later, I would have insisted on doing that. Of course, I would have done that interview. So there were moments like that, but, it's we're always on a learning curve.
You moved us forward, even though you didn't do that article.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I'm so curious about that, because that is a huge decision on being authentic on something that is that controversial. And, I have never made my personal life my banner or anything, but I have to say that 5 years earlier, being in a relationship with a woman and fearing for my job and fearing because I was, scared something would happen. And finally I was like, I can't live like that. So I came out. But if as just a reporter in a local news market, I was worried about that. I cannot even fathom you being up at the highest level and saying, yep, love me or leave me.
Well, and sometimes I think maybe it is easier at a higher level, because you can say love me or leave me. I mean, I was, when we were going to come out, we were going to come to New Jersey, we were going to be here. And, AT&T had a wonderful, and when I did my, welcome thing, I was like, Lori and I wouldn't move to New Jersey if we didn't think we were going to have a culture that strived to be welcoming. The mission statements, the value statements, we had domestic partnership benefits. The industry as a whole, I would say the Bell system, the break off, we're leaders in terms of domestic partner benefits. And and then, I have had, I had to be executives who had been, 26 years, and for the first time felt comfortable bringing their loved one to a, office Christmas party or something like that. I mean, that's to me, I don't know what, hopefully I accomplished a lot in that job, but to me, it's hard to beat that.
Yes.
For people to be who they are.
That is, being who you are. And then I do like that story about, deciding not what's going to look best on your resume, but really saying how you want to live, which a lot of people don't take the time to get into their own skin on what really matters to them. And they don't think that the word fun has equal value to achievement. And I think fun and achievement, if I had to pick, you all know I'm going to go with fun, but it doesn't mean you don't achieve. Just
right.
And
I don't think I wouldn't hold myself in my 20s. Although I had a lot of fun, but work always came first. Achievement always came first. So I wouldn't hold myself out at all in my early years in terms of putting fun where it should be in the equation. Although I shouldn't say that, we had lots of fun, but work always came first and achievement always came first. And I do, it's easier at where I was to take that position. And hopefully, certain people would not feel, given their circumstances, empowered to be able to be authentic. And I get that. And there's a risk to it. There still is a risk to it. And so by my being out, if that helps someone else think about it or decide they wanted something else for themselves, then that's terrific. We have employee resource groups, and like a lot of companies, again, this goes back to days. And one was what was it called? I can't remember. It was a gay group. And I went out they had an annual meeting, and I was out to address it. And a lot of them didn't know I was gay. And so when I started to talk, I talked about Lori's and my decision to come out and how welcoming AT&T was. I mean, there were people crying in tears, which, again, I get, but if I thought, wow, okay, then this is the reason I should be in this job.
Well, certainly one of them. Did you ever hear people gossiping about you before you did that?
So I am one of those people that you could stick a knife in my back and twist it a few times and I'd be the last to know it. And it's, call it naivete, but so a few, yes, there have been some that I just want to put out of my head, where, someone didn't like that, I was gay and had a partner, and I think that had influenced it. But you gotta, well, I shouldn't say you gotta. For me, I'm very fortunate. I just keep moving forward.
How would you advise somebody though that gets kind of caught up in the negativity or the people talking about them? And because work can, a lot of people get tied up in their own emotional baggage, and it affects their career. How have you dealt with that, or how have you advised others in terms of being able to kind of protect, not get so emotionally involved? I know you had your golden rules, and I think you hit on some of that in them.
Well, yeah, I just, true north, just, be true, my golden rules of leadership, but, integrity is incredibly important. The transparency in terms of how you communicate, respect for the individual, which means that, and I think this is the human condition, it's hard to do, but assume good things. Don't assume bad intentions when someone says something. So often I think we misconstrue what, based on our own feelings and our own framework, we misconstrue what people are saying to us, or what we think they're intending, and that sort of stuff. And my experience is that gets people in a lot of trouble and a lot of unnecessary conflict. And so if people can just cop an attitude that I'm going to assume this person is not trying to be mean to me, is not trying to whatever, and then, by being authentic and saying, hey, this is how I felt when you just said that, but I'm going to assume that wasn't your intention. Let's talk about it. It's relationships, right? Whether they're at work or at their home or at the grocery store, they have a lot in common, in my opinion and experience.
I love your golden rules.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if we can talk about those and then find out why that never made it into a New York Times bestseller. Actually,
it did get run on C-SPAN for many, many nights. So if you were in a hotel room and couldn't sleep, you could turn on and hear me doing the golden rules of leadership. But thank you. Yeah, what's funny, again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to reflect. I wrote that when I was 35 years old. And I think of it now and think, oh, that's a little arrogant, thinking that you could be providing leadership guidelines and philosophies at age 35. But
they're fantastic.
Yeah. And there are a lot of 35-year-olds who dispute that with you right now. Boy, some of them are just killing it.
So anyways, but I had been observing bosses and leaders for a while, and it developed some opinions on the way, because I had observed some behaviors that, from the view of a 20-year-old thought, this is, crazy kind of stuff, kind of like, the unproductive behavior of leaders and bosses, et cetera. And so it was the mid 90s. And so I decided to write a speech calling out this behavior in what I would hope would be a somewhat humorous way. Now, if I rewrote it today, I think I'd use different language, but I think the rules are exactly the same. I'd be recommending the same leadership rules today as I was 30 years ago, or 30, even more than that. So here's the list. I don't know if you want me to do a quick run through.
Yes.
And I won't, but so what I did so the first one, everyone's time is valuable. And so for every one of these rules, I would actually share a live example of someone behaving badly, no names used, in order to hopefully, So anyways, everybody's time is valuable. And today we would call that respect for the individual. No temper tantrums. To me, that's all about the culture that we create as leaders, and whether it's one that inspires or doesn't. Get to the point. To me, that's the rule that emphasizes the incredible importance of communications, of leaders' communications to inspire people and to get clarity around what the mission is. Be candid. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. I call that transparency today. I mean, I think that's what we would call it today, but be candid with the folks that you work with. Rule number 5, just say thank you. And that's all about gratitude and being grateful as leaders to the folks that we're serving. Integrity is everything is rule number 6. And I don't think I would change those words at all. And the final one is number 7. If you don't know, who does? And that's all about the leader's essential critical role in providing direction as to where we're going, why we're going there, how we're going to get there, and being able to say it in a way that everybody sees the role they play in that mission. And so those are my 7 golden rules of leadership back from when I was a 35-year-old.
It's a lot of communication and truth, right?
A lot of communication, a lot of transparency. Yep.
Who was the worst boss you ever had, and what did you learn from that person?
The worst boss? So I did go through a period of time where the no temper tantrum rule is I did find myself in a series of bosses who just thought the louder they yelled, the more effective that they would be. And then the people that they yelled at started yelling at the people that worked for them. And I mean, you just see this horrible culture getting created that was so unnecessary. And so that would, but I'm not naming names. I didn't name names 35 years ago. I'm not naming names now. So
I always think you learn more about leadership from a bad leader than a good one.
Well, and that's absolutely what I think at that point in my life, it was that reflection on, man, this isn't why, this is crazy behavior, and, making fun of it, but calling it out. But yeah, I learned a lot from, again, a lot of what not to do. So that's why, making sure that you get those. So what's the alternative, the constructive alternative to that?
There's a woman down here in Florida. I don't know if you ever ran into her, Alex Sink, who was big in the banking industry, very, very big in the banking industry, and then went on to be the Florida state treasurer, ran for governor, just a really amazing person. When I interviewed her, she talked about how she tracked her career and how she just made it very clear where she wanted to go and had accountability for her bosses, not them having accountability for her, but she would say, within a year, I want to be doing X, Y, and Z. And then she'd have meetings with them to make sure they were keeping their end of the bargain. And that worked very well for her. You tracked high and fast. How did you pull that off?
So when I was fortunate to be hired into a company that had me on a management development program. So I was either going to be solidly in middle management or out the door in a timed path. And then that kind of put me into that kind of pack. So, but I would say it was a company that had a great leadership development program. I took advantage of every single opportunity. I never said no. I trusted that, the set of experiences that were being put together were the right ones. And in those days, it's curious as this generation, working for a large corporation like AT&T, to get those experiences as soon as I could. It always, not always, but almost always meant a relocation to go, because that's where it was. It was either back in headquarters, or it was out in the field sales, or it was in, so there was that part as well. The education was also very important to me. I just thought, when I was 21, I just thought a company's going to pay tuition aid to, sign me up. I just took a significant advantage of that. And I would encourage folks, particularly when you're young, if you have that opportunity, take advantage of it. No one can ever take education away from you. You graduate, it's yours for life. No boss, no bad boss, no, it's yours. And that experience and the education and the network. And if you're lucky enough to have your company pay for it, you're very lucky.
So how did you juggle? Because you mentioned earlier that you had 2 master's degrees that you got whenever you were in the middle of sort of this, very aggressive timeline. How were you managing your time, and how were you finding balance? Like some tips that maybe you could give some of our listeners.
I'm not good on balance tips. I'm great on career, that kind of a tip. But again, when I got out of college, I went right to work for AT&T, and they had this tuition aid program. I was like, I'm going to get my master's with someone else paying for it. So I was in Boston. I enrolled in Northeastern, started night, my MBA at night there. And then I got transferred to New Jersey for a promotion. So I wasn't going to say no to that, but that means I had to take that damn accounting course one more time at Fairleigh Dickinson. I think I've taken that intro to accounting way too many times, but anyway. And then I stayed in New Jersey long enough to get to finish. And even actually I was in Manhattan but I could finish it. And I finished it in 81. I got out, I got into college in 77, and I had that one done by 81. Doing it at nighttime. Classes were at night, and you studied whenever you could.
I'm sitting here and watching you, and it looks like your arms are really buff.
Well, I work at that. Although this is a new shoulder. So one of I had a shoulder replacement in November. This November. And one of the boards that I serve on today is ZimmerBiomet, which is a medical device company. Great company, beautiful.
Zimmer's in my knee. I
like to brag at the board meetings. How committed am I to this company? I got the metal shoulders. So anyway, but yeah, thank you. I do try to exercise and work out because
we have not gotten into that, but I think that is so important, whether you are overwhelmed or not, to always have time to do something to take care of your body, and that the payoff is just so huge on that. So how has that played out in your life?
So in the old days, when I was working 7x24, I'd go for an early morning run every morning. I would do about a 5 or 6 mile run. And that was it. I mean, that was the only thing I had time for. It only took sneakers and headphones. So wherever I was waking up, in whatever hotel room and whatever, the gym. So that was how I did it in the early, in the first 25, 30 years of, working those kind of hours. That was a real outlet for me. But it's interesting. USA Today did an article on, and actually I had, because I got one of those tombstone things. It was a front page article on women in the C-suite who came to it with sports backgrounds. And in my case, I was a ski racer growing up. So in other words, you play competitive sports in grammar school, high school, college, and the number of women in C-suite who had played competitive sports through their school years. Big article on it, linking, actually, I don't remember if they made a compelling scientific link or it was just anecdotal, but to your point, it is, you got to keep your body sharp because you're dependent on it.
Well, that's really interesting about the ski racer, isn't that, Michelle? It's like, what?
I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. So what did you learn about leadership from being a ski racer? I always say everything I learned in life, I learned on the seat of my bicycle in Colorado. Watch out who's coming up behind you. There's always someone ready to run you off the road. Don't worry about that cloud over there because it might not rain on you over here. It's like, I have a whole speech I can do on that. But what was valuable in that experience?
I think it's, so skiing is an interesting sport because even though you're on a team, you're doing it yourself. So it's not your normal team kind of sports. And the only other sport I played competitively was tennis, which was either doubles or singles. So I didn't have that, field hockey or that kind of a team experience. Just, practice, work hard, practice, fall down, get up, fall down, get up again, So,
that's a great metaphor. Yeah.
I'd say that's kind of the,
Did it make you a better risk taker?
I would think so. And I'm not sure. That's a great question. I haven't reflected on that as to why, because I definitely think people would describe me as a risk taker. Was that part of it? Probably, I'm sure that played into it. Long time, one of the questions, what's great advice have you gotten someone one time, or I read, or it stuck with me, what's the worst that can happen? Sometimes when you think kind of, Michelle, you're something, when you're at that precipice and you're like all tied up in knots because you don't know what decision to make. If I found that sometimes if you step back and go, so if I make, what's the worst that's going to happen? And if you really look at it, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. It's not as scary as, it felt, 5 minutes ago before you kind of put that framework on it. And so that's something that I found in terms of risk taking, and sometimes I think, you have to answer that honestly, but often we think it's going to be worse than it.
Yes, because our brains can take us somewhere crazy. That's for sure. Well, so you also have spent so much time dealing with different cultures, people from all over the world. I know you've lived internationally. What has some of that taught you about leadership and creating really healthy cultures?
So I would say that the most interesting thing in terms of one of those defining moments was I, as a sophomore in college, chose to go to Nairobi, Kenya in 1975 for 6 months. And honestly, I wasn't even sure where it was, but I was going. And so, and that was the beginning of loving living outside my comfort zone. I mean, that was an experience, it was a transformational experience. It was a defining moment. Not that I got at that time, but I look back and think that was Betsy 2.0, or it was another version of Betsy when she came back from Kenya as a junior in college. And
why? And then how did that dawn on you that was that so significant?
Dawn over time, but I think the reason it was is, I was completely I didn't even know where I was. I got dropped down after this ridiculous flight through 5 different countries, including Karachi, Pakistan, because we got a good deal on the flights. And I land in Nairobi after days on planes. I don't even know where I am. I go to a goat roast and where I meet my village family. And the next thing I know, I'm in a car with these strangers heading off to a tea plantation where I'm going to spend 4 days with the family in a 1-room hut. You get over, and that was what rolled for the next 6 months. And I lived to tell the stories out, because there's a couple of things you do as a 19-year-old that like crazy, but live to tell the stories. And it was transformational, because what else could anybody throw at me at that point that would cause me to be uncomfortable or not confident or
challenge your belief. You got thrown into this completely foreign and drastically different environment from where you were accustomed, and probably the people, because completely different behaviors and about and how you can not be arrogant and go in there and figure out how to embrace
that. Yeah. And I was good, but anyway, so that was a big, again, in hindsight, because then there was nothing any opportunity there's nothing to be afraid of, or nothing not to jump at, or nothing not to go for.
Did it change some of your values or the way you looked at other people?
Different than me. I was fortunate to grow up in an environment where, although it wasn't a diverse, as I would describe it today, it was inclusive from a cultural standpoint. And so I went into that with a pretty good foundation, cultural growing up, that sort of stuff. And so, it was the beginning of just always happy to be outside my comfort zone, which is why every one of those jobs, people say, well, I look back and think, who let a 26-year-old run a central office plant with, going in? And it's like, I didn't know anybody else. They think I can do it, then I'm going to go do it. And, again, what's the worst that's going to happen? I learn a whole bunch.
what is the wisdom that you can take from that and give to someone who's not going to go to Kenya? And so that they can go into their discomfort zone, take assignments that they're not familiar with, don't find themselves in that horrible imposter feeling, right? You know, it's like to just dive in and be. So what did you learn from that you can teach someone who's not going to go through that?
So a couple of things. So that for me that have helped along the way is I am a big believer in working hard. A phrase that I love is from sports is make the practice harder than the game. And that is something that I learned young to adopt, and I've done it all the time. And so that means that you're going to have more confidence and you're going to have more comfort because you will be prepared. So work hard, make the practice harder than the game. Be prepared for those opportunities and those moments, whether it's a sales presentation, whether it's a meeting with your boss, whether it's a, big, whatever it is, be prepared. If it's important, work on it, be prepared. And that will give you a whole lot more confidence. And then the other thing for me, and I know people, it's hard to believe this, but I eventually thought, I think I'm just as smart as everybody. So if I work as hard or harder, and then I don't understand something, then I'm probably doing everybody a service to ask for that to be clarified. And the more I got more comfortable discerning, yes, this needs clarification. This isn't me not getting it. This isn't me not working hard enough. Then you can go into those new learning situations with being incredibly prepared, knowing you're as smart as everybody else there. And thus, if you don't understand something, ask.
Did you fail at anything?
Oh, yeah. I failed early on. I don't know if it's good to fail early on or but I gave a talk one time. I was in my 20s. I was a product marketing manager for a teleconferencing product line. And I was to go give a presentation to all this new product technology to the sales organization, a big sales organization. And maybe there were 400, 500 people in the room. And the material had come a little late, and I was late. I didn't prepare. I just thought I was going to be, cool enough to walk in there and I'll wing it. And it was horrible. I mean, I could, you weren't getting any reaction. You weren't getting any questions. You get to the end, it's absolute. And the people in this room, I'm a little second level manager. The people in the room are people that, probably going to have a say sometime when, gee, should we take Bernard for that, whatever? Oh God, I saw her give a presentation. It was horrible. And so it was the last time I was not prepared for anything important. And it was the beginning of practice harder than the game, Betsy Bernard. It was it's one of those, that other one. I've got two things where I still, go, what were you thinking? And that's one of them. And that one's a lot of decades ago.
What about the other one?
Yeah, well, we already talked about it.
Saying no to all,
Saying no.
So those are two biggies in my lineup.
So, okay, so if you had to write a headline to caption your life, because you've sure been around the block and done a few things, what would it be?
I don't know. That was the only one I don't know. She worked her tail off. She cared about everybody. She hopes she served everybody well. I'm a believer in servant leadership. If you're in a leadership role, you're there to serve. You're there to serve your employees and your customers and your shareholders. And hopefully that, she served those well. But I hope I got another couple decades left to work on that.
Well, keep working out like that. You probably will. All right.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been amazing. So we're so excited just to have your time and that hard-won wisdom you've shared with us in the audience. There's a couple of things aside from the leadership lessons, because we're going to have to write those down for everybody to remember, because they're just timeless. Thank you for that. There were a few other things that stood out to me. whenever faced with what's next, you got to go for the one that's going to challenge you, period. Loud and clear. You're here to grow. I also appreciated the comment that you made about it's very important for you to share and communicate your aspirations with your managers and leadership team, because they can't read your mind. You got to tell them what you want, and that enables them to be advocates and champions to help you get there. That was really important. It talked about education is yours for life. Nobody can take it away from you. So you've got to take advantage of every opportunity to learn, grow, and be developed. And then work hard. And you said practice, fall down, and get back up. So I liked the fact that, you talked about making practice harder than the game itself. So you're really ready for anything. And then I like my last two were by seeking understanding, you're probably doing others a big favor when you ask questions or ask for clarification. And leaders are there to serve. That was a great one too.
There's a lot to unpack in this.
So much.
Thank you. Well, it was fun. Lots of fun. So, and great luck with hard-won wisdom. What a great platform.
Well, thank you so much, Betsy, for doing this. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise.
Thank you for joining the Hard-Won Wisdom podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.